Our epistle reading this morning is taken once again from the book of Romans, Romans chapter 14 and verses 1 through 12. Listen to what the Spirit might whisper into your situations today, your circumstances, your life, in this reading from Romans, beginning at 14 and 1. Welcome those who are weak in faith, but not for the purpose of quarreling over opinions. Some believe in eating anything, while the weak eat only vegetables. Those who eat must not despise those who abstain, and those who abstain must not pass judgment on those who eat, for God has welcomed them. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before their own Lord that they stand or fall, and they will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make them stand. Some judge one day to be better than another, while others judge all days to be alike. Let all be fully convinced in their own minds. Those who observe the day, observe it in honor of the Lord. And those who eat, eat in honor of the Lord, since they give thanks to God. While those who abstain, abstain in honor of the Lord, and give thanks to God. We do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord. And if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, so that he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. Why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Or why do you despise your brother or sister? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, "As I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall give praise to God." So then each of us will be accountable to God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We do not live to ourselves. Do you believe it? And we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord. And if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. It's comforting. It's poetic. You hear it sometimes at funerals. But do you believe it? Does anyone believe it? We can get there with our heads, but can we get there with our hearts? Because most of the time we are convinced that we live for ourselves. I am the captain of my fate, the master of my soul. The master of my fate, the captain of my soul, whichever way it goes. I can do what I please with my potential, with my time, with my gifts, with my resources, with my body. I can do whatever I want. I'm my own. And secondly, how does it help me if I belong to God in death? Death is death, right? Death is a thing to never be thought about. Death is a thing to be ignored. Death is a thing that happens to other people and in movies. Romans almost makes it sound like death isn't all that awful. Like even beyond death, everything will be all right. These are two counterintuitive truths. They run counter to our intuitions that the Apostle Paul is selling us. First, that we do not belong entirely to ourselves. Our culture tells us that we do. And second, that death isn't so bad. Our culture tells us that it is. You know, you hear it said occasionally, everything will be all right. There are songs about it. People say it like it's the easiest thing in the world. Oh, it's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be fine. But people who say such glib and simple things usually don't make a case for why everything's going to be all right. And so today, let us make a case for the claim that everything is going to be all right. You and I have lived for years in fight or flight mode. Fight or flight mode is supposed to be temporary. It's supposed to last a few minutes. It's not supposed to last 3 or 4 years. We have lived in this high-tension mode of fight or flight for a long time. But everything is going to be all right. In joy and in suffering, in wellness and in pain, in living and in dying. Everything is going to be all right. You know, some truths are hard to believe. They don't make sense at first glance, but they're fun to think about. I'm going to give you some examples. Did you know that Anne Frank, Martin Luther King Jr., and Barbara Walters were all born the same year? That's hard to believe, isn't it? 1929. Anne Frank and Martin Luther King seem like ancient history. Barbara Walters died last year. It's hard to believe, but it's true. Did you know that it takes a pineapple up to 2 years to grow? No wonder they're so expensive. It takes them 2 years to grow. Most fruits take 1 summer. And the fluffy white clouds, not like we have today, but the fluffy white ones that you see on a sunny day, the ones that just kind of scut above you in the sky, flying lightly and fluffy over your heads, the average one weighs 1.1 million pounds. All that heavy water just sort of lightly scuttling above your head like a passing thought or a fading memory. It's hard to believe, but it's true. This was a fun fact. There are more tigers living in cages in the United States than there are running free in the rest of the world put together. 10,000 privately owned tigers in this country alone, compared to 4,000 in the wild throughout the world. And speaking of wildcats, did you know that cheetahs can purr and they can meow, but they can't roar? Just like your cat at home, if you've got one. It's probably no surprise that cats sleep away 70% of their lives. 16 hours a day, wouldn't that be nice? And for being so lazy, they can run up to 30 miles an hour. There are some facts that are just too fanciful to sound true. Most of them you would never think about. Some of them are about places and their distances. Like the state of Maine in New England is closer to Africa than any other state in the country. It's only 3,000 miles from the coast of Morocco. 3,000 miles. That's like New York to Los Angeles. Unbelievable, but true. Almost all of South America is further east than Florida. Look at a map. It's hard to believe. Just a few more unbelievable truths, some of the fun ones. Botanists say that bananas are technically berries, but that strawberries and raspberries and blackberries are not. Sharks have existed on this planet longer than trees. Oof. Last one, and one of the most fun. Nintendo. Nintendo has been around since 1889. They started off making decks of cards. Many truths are just so hard to believe, and yet they're still true. Everything in our experience of life tells us, I live to myself. I live for myself, and when I die alone. Dying is the one thing that you always do alone. And death is always bad. But here we have the Apostle Paul in Romans telling us that even if and when the worst thing happens, everything is okay. Everything's all right. Because we don't belong to ourselves. We belong to God. Living or dying, we belong to God. Let's just get this out of the way, because I told you a few weeks ago that I'd never wanted to preach from Romans, and here I am preaching from Romans again. From now on out, I'm only ever going to preach from Romans. It's going to make Christmas really weird. It is not lost on me that Paul is still eccentric. Did you notice how he graciously instructs us not to judge people who disagree with us, and then he goes on to call anyone who disagrees with him weak. The weak only eat vegetables. The weak celebrate holidays. We strong know better. But don't judge them. Paul is still quirky. And here, as last week, Paul is giving us spare bits of advice as he winds up his letter to the Romans, as he, in a lengthy manner, closes the letter. And he promotes a surprisingly open-minded view of faith and of truth. He says basically, let people believe what they believe. Let them do what they think is right. As long as they're convinced that what they believe and what they do is right, let it be. Don't bother them. If their conscience tells them to be vegetarians, let them be vegetarians. I'm going to eat meat over here. If their conscience tells them to celebrate the high holy days, the holidays, as if some seasons are holier than others and closer to God, that's fine. Let them do that. What does it hurt? We don't all have to go about being Christians in the exact same way. But we do have to refrain from judging each other. Be liberal, be conservative, be cisgender or transgender, be whatever you're called to be. But be kind, be accepting, be non-judgmental. And then the beautiful claim, we don't live to ourselves. And we don't die to ourselves. If we live to God. And if we die to God. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we all belong to God. It's as if to say, these things that you argue about, these things that divide you, they don't really matter. They're not going to last. Our lives are lived in God, and in our death we return to the same God, all of us. And so these petty arguments are irrelevant. Live and let live. Everything is going to be all right. You and me, we fall victim to either or thinking. Either I'm right and you're wrong, or you're wrong and I'm right. Those are the only two options. Except there are usually a few other options that we're not naming. Either it's okay to eat animals because we've got these incisor teeth for tearing flesh that God gave us, and because some of them are just so tasty, or else it's wrong to kill and to eat animals because all of life is precious and to be protected and to be treasured. Either it's good to observe holy days like Christmas and Easter and Pentecost, or else every day is holy and there's no need to observe one more than the other. In fact, the old-time Presbyterians only observed the Sabbath, and if Christmas didn't fall on the Sabbath, you either celebrated it on the Sunday closest to it or you didn't celebrate at all. Pentecost and Easter are always on Sunday. Either all days are equal or else some are holy. Both things cannot be true. Find the truth and then be right. We love being right. Find the truth and then circle the wagons. Preserve that truth. Either life has meaning or else it's pointless and random. Are those the only two options? And truly, if those are your possibilities, they're both pretty heavy. Either there's a God who knows and loves you and who determines your lot, or else we are alone in a purposeless universe. Are those the only two options? And there again, both possibilities are kind of scary. For one is laden with responsibility and the other with too much freedom. Here's the scariest one to me. Either outer space never ends, or else it does. Which is weirder to think about? And if it ends, what's out there? What puts an end to it? Is there a wall? And what's beyond the wall? Who knows? Paul is telling us here that God lives sometimes in the middle of some of these questions, and we don't always have to agree because we all do belong to God in living and in dying. We belong to God. The mystery of God runs through us and through all things. But that's a little too vague and a little too abstract for our thinking. We like clear answers, and we love to be right. And we don't want to die. And we do want to live to ourselves. We really do. What business is it of yours if I spend my evenings drinking gin gimlets, whatever those are, and smoking cheap cigars. As long as I don't do it here at work, what do you care? What do you care if I choose to develop my skills or not? Maybe I'm a hauntingly beautiful singer, but I'm ashamed to sing. That's mine to decide if I'm going to sing. Maybe I'm an exceptionally good artist, but I don't want to share that. I'm not into art. Maybe I don't want to go to school. Maybe I don't want to be part of a church. Maybe I don't want to vote. Those are my affairs. They should make no more difference to you whether I plant daylilies or zinnias in my garden. Except that the gifts of God are meant to be enjoyed and to be shared. Except that we belong not only to ourselves, but to our communities that shape us, and to the people who love us, and to the wider world. Have you never stood by helplessly and wrung your hands in frustration while somebody wasted their gifts? While somebody with good gifts to share with this world did not use them, did not live into them, did not claim them? Some intelligent kid got D's in school? I think you know what I'm talking about. The world is diminished when we don't find it within ourselves to share those skills and abilities that are entrusted to our keeping for the well-being of the world and for our own joy. But ultimately, we can't force them. We can't make them. In that sense, they really do decide their own lot if they refuse to share the goodness inside of them, when they choose to turn away from community and choose isolation. We all suffer from it. For we do not live these lives entirely to ourselves, as much as we wish we could. We live them to the God who bestowed them and who grants us breath from one moment to the next. And we live them in families and communities and in the world. Everything in me tells me that I can do whatever I want. It's my business. And yes, to some degree that's true. But I will only find joy when I give my life to something bigger than itself. We live our lives in God. And this living our lives in God, it gives our lives meaning and purpose and power and peace. It means we're not isolated. For if we could truly live our lives in God, then we would live them in such a way that we would share their gifts with the world around us. And so God's goodness would flow through us like conduits, even in small ways, and enrich the life of the world. It means that death is not an end to our lives, for in the deathless life of God, there we are. And though both things might appear frightful to us, not living to ourselves and eventually dying, they're really both okay. Not just okay, but good. Okay, last fun fact. On a timeline, Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, is closer to the iPhone than to the building of the Great Pyramids by almost 500 years. 2007 to 2060 BC, or 2600 BC. Almost unbelievable, but true. There are so many truths that seem untrue, like the abiding truth that in the end there's really nothing to fear, and that fear is worse than death. Fear is worse than death. We are created to live these lives boldly and freely, and not just to ourselves, but to the God who grants them, and to the communities that shape them. We are created to live these lives and die these deaths in the knowledge that there's no isolation, that we belong to each other. We belong to the world. We all belong to God. And not judging each other for our differences, but rather cherishing each other for our differences should be our rule. And come what may. Come what may in the decades that we're given, come suffering, come pain, come peril or loss, somehow it doesn't matter. Somehow in the end, things turn out all right, even though the worst should happen, and it will happen to all of us eventually. In the end, beauty and life that birthed us reclaim us. and take us back. It's okay, even though we die, which we all will and should. For in the end, villain and victim, lover and hater, innocent bystander and guilty colluder, helper and helpless, all the ones forgotten by history and by time, all of us return empty-handed and silent before the calm and beautiful eternity that dreamed us into being in the first place. Love to love, light to light, goodness to goodness, beauty to beauty. Believer and non-believer alike, we belong to God. We belong to a love and a beauty and a well-being from which we stray in these bodies of dust, from which our spirits wander far, but to which we are called back in the end. And so until then, we are free to make mistakes and to live for ourselves and to create beauty and to destroy beauty and to love and be loved and to hate and be hated and to share who we are with the world around us. Let us live these lives without fear, all the time trusting this hard-to-accept truth, that we do not live them to ourselves, and we do not die them to ourselves. If we live to the Lord. And if we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. Everything is going to be all right. Better than all right. Everything is going to be good. Amen.